Hello and welcome to Bow Beats, and in this tutorial we're going to check out how to connect and sequence external gear using the Novation Circuit. So what we need in order to make this work is, well, firstly, obviously, the circuit, but then we also need a couple of other things. We need at least one of these little breakout cables, which actually is like a 3.5mm jack and a MIDI jack in one end. So we need one of those. We also need a MIDI cable. So here I have a tangled mess of MIDI. it's a basic MIDI cable, and it looks something like this. All you need to do is go to your local music store or check your internet store for a MIDI cable. It shouldn't be a problem. Now, you might ask, why do I want to connect something to the Novation Circuit? I mean, it's a groove box. It's self-contained. It's got two synths, 4 sample channels, you can sample flip, so why would you want to connect something externally to this one? Well, there are basically 3 reasons. Reason number 1 is that you want to sync the circuit with different types of gear. Not sending MIDI notes, you just want to sync them so they play together in tandem. So if you have, for example, another synthesizer or a drum machine or a groove box, you want them to be synced properly. And that means sending clock and the transport values, start and stop values, from the circuit to another unit. And reason number 2 is that you want to use the circuit in order to sequence other gear. So this isn't just sending clock and start and stop values. This is actually sending notes of data from synth 1 and synth 2, and even perhaps the drum or sample channels or channel to another device. So basically you're using that circuit as a sequencer, not only sending clock. Number 3 is that you want to input MIDI data from another source into the circuit. It could be a controller to control parameters on the circuit, or it could be a MIDI keyboard. Now, in this video, I will mostly go over options 1 and 2, not so much option number 3. Well, firstly, because connecting an external keyboard into this is pretty straightforward. You just take the cable, plug it into the input, plug the MIDI cable here into it, and into your MIDI enabled keyboard. And then you just have to set the keyboard to channel 1 for synth 1 or channel 2, MIDI channel 2 for synth 2. So it's not that complicated. So I will focus mostly on number 1 and number 2, sending clock or sequencing external gear. So in order to sequence external gear, what do you need to know? Well, first you need to know that synth 1 sends MIDI on MIDI channel 1. MIDI has 16 channels per unique MIDI port. So this unit here, has an output and an input, and the output sends 16 channels of MIDI. So synth 1 sends on MIDI channel 1, synth 2 on MIDI channel 2. The drums, or the sample channels, sends on MIDI channel 10. And then we also use MIDI channel 16 for some different operations, but we won't go into that in depth in this video. Now, a second thing you need to know is that you need to check so that the circuit actually sends the data that you want, or doesn't send data that you don't want. Basically, it's about checking so that it sends clock if you want to sync it with another device, tempo sync it, or that it sends MIDI data or receives MIDI data if that's something you want to change. And these two are separated. So you can send clock but not send MIDI data. And I will show you why that can be very useful as well. One thing you should also consider is that these knobs, the macro knobs, they send MIDI CC. CC is sort of control data, and depending on what synthesizer you have connected the circuit to, you might impact the sound on that external synthesizer by moving the macro knobs, because they send CC data. So that's something to be mindful of. It's usually not a big problem, but just be mindful about it. Also, if you want to read up a little bit on this, I will leave some links in the descriptions for texts from Novation that you can check out. So, in order to check that we have the correct settings, we hold Shift and we power up the unit. What we're now seeing here on the unit are 2 lit pads here on both sides. Now these two here stands for, on the left side here, stands for RX, which basically is that there is reception of MIDI, so it will take MIDI notes from an external source, for example a keyboard. Now the second one here is the MIDI transmission. So if we turn this off here, like this, you won't send any MIDI data. And this can be very useful if you want to sequence the circuit with external gear, but you don't want to send MIDI on channel 1 or channel 2 here, for example, to the external source. And I will show you how. These two buttons here, well, basically, it means that if this one is lit here, means that it's set to auto-detect. So either, auto-detect it's about clock here. So either it will detect clock source from an external source. Basically, if you connect something into the circuit, it will sync to whatever is connected. Well, if the device that you connect sends clock, if this one is lit, well, it means that the circuit will adapt to the tempo of that other device, but also that it will send the clock as well to another device via the output. So basically we can leave these two lit all the time when we're connecting external gear. There are some circumstances where you might want to change it, but it's a little bit too advanced for this video. So at the moment we have MIDI, this MIDI transmission off here, and we'll just press play and start it. So now I want to connect the circuit to an external synthesizer, but I don't want to send note data from channels 1 and 2. So here I have the Volca Keys. The Volca Keys doesn't have a MIDI output, so you can't use this to output MIDI into the Novation Circuit, but it has a MIDI input. So we can use the circuit here in order to sequence or simply tempo sync these two devices. Now, because the Volca Keys has an internal sequencer, I've chosen to tempo sync, but not send MIDI informations from channel 1 or 2. So let me take here, I just take this chord here, put it into the output of the circuit, take it and put it into the MIDI input here. Now, if you listen closely here, I will play just a little phrase here on the circuit, and you will probably notice that the Volca Keys doesn't play. So this is what we can just, we turn down the volume here on the Volca Keys and press play here. So basically I have 3 notes playing here, and now as I press play here, you can see that the Volca Keys here, the play button here is active, and it's actually running through a step sequence here. So if I turn up the volume, so what you're hearing now is the Volca Keys playing a totally different sequence from what is playing here on the circuit. So this means that I could program a sequence using the sequencer here on the Volca Keys and have it play alongside the circuit. And this could be useful, for example, because it gives you another synth voice to play beside the circuit, rather than having a synth voice on top of the 2 ones here. So pressing play now will make both play. And as you can hear, it doesn't really fit, because there's something totally different programmed on the Volca Keys here. But they play together. Now, what if I want the Volca Keys here to play what is actually going on over on the circuit? Well, I'll turn off the device, hold Shift, start it up, activate Note Send, press play. Now, if I just erase the data, if I press play here on the Volca Keys here, you will hear there's nothing playing at the moment. Now, if I let me just turn down the volume of the circuit and press play. What you heard there was the Volca Keys playing what is actually going on the synth channel 1 here. It's because synth channel 1 here sends a MIDI channel 1 and the Volca is set to receive MIDI data on channel 1. Basically this means that if I turn up the volume, you will hear both devices playing simultaneously. Now, as you can see, there are many benefits to this. This gives a fatter sound and lets you sort of overdub something. You could also use it like this. Say that you have a sequence running here on channel 1 on the circuit, and you have the external synthesizer playing the same thing. Basically, the notes are sent to the external synthesizer, and you say, well, I don't really want the circuit sound. Well, here's the thing. You can't just mute it. From the mixer view here on the circuit, you can't just mute it. You have to lower the volume. Let me see. Let me check here. If I press play and I mute, everything mutes because mute actually stops MIDI from being sent. But let me just lower the volume. So basically, that is very useful, and that also lets you, like, you know, you can mix between the sources. So what have I showed you? Well, I showed you that you can tempo sync the circuit to external gear if you turn off the note send. So that's just basic tempo syncing, no notes are being sent from the circuit. But you can also use it to send notes on MIDI channel 1 and 2. Now, mind you, if you don't have any synthesizer connected that receives data on channels 1, 2, and 10, well, then it's not really a problem to have the MIDI send enabled. It's only a problem if you don't want to actually send any data at all. So I've also shown you that it's really easy to create this sort of overdub where either synth 1 or synth 2 is used to sequence melodic content on external gear. And this can be quite useful, for example, if you use external gear that doesn't really have, you know, the sort of, that doesn't really have an onboard sequencer, for example. Now, you might wonder, can I only connect one device to the circuit? And it's a sort of a yes and no kind of question. The circuit alone only has one MIDI output, but since the MIDI sends on 16 channels, you can actually use what we call a MIDI through or MIDI splitter, and I will show you one right now. This little box here is a Kenton through 5, and it basically means that I can take the MIDI output from the circuit here, and I can connect it to the input of the through box. Let's see here if I can manage to do this. And what this does is that it splits the one input into 5 outputs. Basically, you can then send MIDI to, say for example, from MIDI through 1 here to the Volca Keys that receives a MIDI channel 1. Then you can send from MIDI through 2 into another synthesizer that might receive data on MIDI channel 2. Basically, you can have 2 synthesizers overdub, or even 3 or 4 or 5, and there are bigger boxes as well if you want to overdub the 2 channels. But it could also be the case sort of that you use 2 external synthesizers to overdub the 2 channels on the circuit here, 1 and 2, and you could perhaps send just clock to the other ones just to have them synced up, and using, for example, external sequencers in those synthesizers. That could be an option. Now let's say you don't have the money to buy a Kenton through 5 or something similar. You could use a daisy chaining function. And let me try and show you what that actually means. Alright, so in order to daisy chain, I've connected the circuit here via the output into the input of the Minilogue here. The Minilogue is set to receive note data on channel 2, which is this channel here. This means that the Minilogue will play whatever is playing on channel 2 of the circuit. Now this data has its limitations because the Minilogue here is set up so that I send MIDI out from the Minilogue into the input of this little device here, the Korg Volca Keys. Now this means that they will all be tempo synced. So for example, let me press play here. So what you're hearing now is the Minilogue playing the part, because the volume here is turned down on the circuit. And everything playing, you see the play button here is lit, you can see it travels through here at the same pace. Now you might be wondering, why isn't the Volca Keys playing anything? Well, it's because I haven't programmed anything into the sequencer yet. And because of the way that the Minilogue is set up, it just sends the clock through. It doesn't send the note values through as I had it set up. But different synthesizers has different possibilities. They can have a MIDI through port, for example, where they send all the data, not only clock, through to another device. So these are some things you can really, get into once you get more synthesizers. But of course, using a splitter or a dedicated USB or a bigger MIDI I/O is of course easier, or using a computer as a hub, that would probably be easier as well, or going via a DAW, for example, setting these things up. But this was a video on showing how to use the circuit here in order to send the clock, send MIDI notes, connect external gear, and even here daisy chaining three things together that run in tandem. So, or run together, might be a more correct way. So this was Bow Beats. I hope you enjoyed this little tutorial, and if you did, consider slapping a like on it, consider subscribing, and I hope to see you in the next video. So thank you so much for watching.